Now, Mercedes-Benz SA has reached what they call a turning point. The German-owned car maker expects to retrench up to 700 employees at its East London assembly plant. This in response to falling global demand for its C-Class sedan car range. Editor-at-large for Financial Mail, David Furlonger, joins us now to look into these potential adjustments to production. Thank you so much for your time, David. Mercedes-Benz is luxury, and usually that part of the consumer market has some defensiveness to it, particularly looking at the fact that most of the vehicles, they export. So you're looking at the global market in which economic growth tends to be higher than South African growth. Have things changed this year?
They have changed. I mean, they changed with COVID 4 years ago.
Yeah.
It's been a little bit up and down since then. It's a difficult year generally. Clearly, we've got the Middle East war. We've got the continuing war in Europe as well.
Yes, yes.
British elections, we've got European elections, US elections. There's a lot of consumer doubt. And bearing in mind that over 90% of Mercedes-Benz cars made here are exported primarily to Europe, Asia and North America, it's the plant here depends on that overseas demand. And where we're seeing that loss of demand, it was kind of inevitable that we would see reduced production here. Perhaps not at the level that they've now announced, but it was kind of inevitable that we would see reduced demand.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about all these risks, right, including election risks, which I don't think are long-term. Could this not be maybe an overreaction from Mercedes-Benz to go as far as retrenching people for maybe risks that could be short-term, particularly also looking at the fact that a lot of central banks might start cutting rates in the second part of this year?
I don't think it's a knee-jerk reaction, certainly.
Yeah.
They have clearly done their sums, and this isn't a specifically South African thing. East London is the lead plant for C-Class sedans around the world, outside China, which looks after itself. So they will look at the effects of elections, which will be short to medium term, but what they're seeing is a general downgrading of sales, particularly at the upper end of the market, particularly this year. But we've probably been seeing it for a year or two, the sort of trend, but now we're seeing the effects of that trend. So they clearly believe that this is an ongoing issue, although it is possible to upgrade production later if necessary in South Africa.
All right. I do understand that the main problem here is the kind of depressed global demand, but also just looking at the challenges that we have in country as well, does this create a kind of perfect storm of headwinds here?
Look, clearly this is not a great place to be manufacturing at the moment in terms of load shedding, in terms of dysfunctional ports, dysfunctional railways, inflation, everything else. But I spoke to the joint CEO, Andreas Brand, yesterday, and he said that competitively, South Africa is still very good on costs comparing to overseas manufacturers, to Mercedes-Benz's other plants overseas. They do have issues. They've had long-standing problems with Transnet, with the East London port. Lots of promises made over the last 10, 15 years which have not been met. So there are frustrations. And in its statement yesterday to SENS at the stock exchange, Mercedes-Benz South Africa did say that contributory factors were some of these local issues, but Brandt is insistent that it's the overseas issue which is the driver.
Yeah, it's a good thing that you also mentioned that they are still quite price competitive, because I was going to ask, with the high cost of doing business in South Africa, if that maybe gives them little runway to cut selling prices over there. But I mean, if they're saying that they're still competitive and still demand is depressed, it seems that there isn't much room for them to maneuver things around. In terms of production, what exactly are they cutting, and how clear is it in terms of how much production they're slashing?
Mercedes-Benz globally are very, very secretive about their capacity and their actual production. What we do know is that last year they built 90,000 cars here.
Okay.
That was on a 3-shift basis. So if you do some basic sums And if you look at the loss of demand this year globally, you're probably looking at around 60, 70,000 this year, which cannot support 3-shift. And that's my estimate.
Okay.
That is not the official estimate.
Yes.
So you can't afford a 3-shift basis anymore. So they're talking about going to 2 shifts, probably end of August, early September. This is a 60-day consultation they're going through with workers and with the unions. And of course, there will be knock-on effects as well, because their component suppliers, their service suppliers will also be potentially losing some workers, some jobs there as well.
Yeah, well, actually, isn't that a concern, you know, the implications also on the local suppliers of parts, considering also the push that we have in the automotive sector for increased local content?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
You know, local content here remains relatively low.
Yeah.
At Mercedes-Benz, it's somewhere in the 30%, but again, they're not open about exactly where they are. Now, clearly, most or many of their major suppliers down in East London are global components companies, which have international associations with Mercedes-Benz. So they will be able to take it on the chin a little bit better than the local suppliers, because Mercedes-Benz, like a lot of companies, is very proud of the fact that it's been increasing demand for smaller products from local suppliers. Now, again, they're part of that 60-day consultation. They will be more worried, I suspect, than the international suppliers.
Just lastly, as we wrap up the conversation, David, do you think that there could be a potential contagion effect in the automotive industry from this?
If you look at the trend internationally, we have 2 major exporters here. Well, two companies that rely almost overwhelmingly on exports. And the other one is BMW. They also over 90% of production. They will be looking at what is happening at Mercedes. I'm quite sure they will have been also having conversations with their principals in Germany. I wouldn't exclude the possibility that they are considering doing something, doing something similar, but I wouldn't like to speculate on what they might do.
All right. Well, thank you so much for giving us some more insight on that very, very important development there, David. That was David Furlonger, Editor-at-Large for Financial Mail.